What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Shea with Align Life Chiropractic and Wellness. Today, this is video 2 of the Live Different video series, and I'm really excited to go through this because today we're going to talk about nutrition, which is such a foundational element of taking a very holistic approach and making a human being well. And this concept of living differently couldn't apply more than to this topic. So we're going to lead in with some really good information, and we're just going to try to shed some light on the difference between what our biological needs are and what our social norms have become. And we're going to point out the idea that the more that we live in association with what's societally expected, the more that our health is going to suffer. So some really good examples of this concept are when we look at what we typically put into our bodies these days in the modern world. So let's start off by looking at processed foods. Number one, the concept of processed foods, this is something that didn't even exist back in the day. We're going to talk about things that food scientists have whipped up for us. Often this comes in the form of fast food, which is, again, a new concept within the last 100 years that we never even had an understanding of and definitely couldn't be taking in on a regular basis before. Many times we're combining things that aren't necessarily food products that our bodies are used to being able to digest. So what that means is genetically our bodies don't really have a good way to be able to utilize these ingredients, and accordingly they become waste products or potentially disease or cancer causing. We also see lots of refined sugars, guys. So this is sucrose, like table sugar. This stuff is a very new product to our body, and unfortunately these days with how much corn and soy we've grown, we have the capacity to make tons and tons of refined sugars, making all of our foods sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, which makes it so that our bodies become very used to very sweet foods, and we get those cravings on a regular basis. I know that you guys know what I'm talking about. I unfortunately suffer from this myself with a little bit of a sweet tooth, but we have to be focused on making sure that we're not taking in too many refined sugars, because it's going to spike our blood sugar, lead to pre-diabetic or diabetes-based conditions, which is definitely not what we want. It's going to lead to a lifestyle chronic disease. Something else that I think is important for us to understand is back in the day, we got our water sources directly from the source, meaning from, an underground well, or there were options for out of a stream, things of that nature. Rain catchment systems were common, but these days we get stuff that has things like fluoride, that essentially treated water. There's also been sometimes a reduction in the mineral content that's in these water sources, and we've also seen, especially here in San Diego, if you look at the quality of the water at the end of the year where they produce the quality assessment tool, you'll notice that there's a high quality of medications, remnant medications that people have had now either in their bodies that have gone out in the form of urine, or potentially they've dumped down the system and now it's in our water sources. So we're getting high quantities of this stuff that's in our bloodstream all the time. This is definitely a new challenge that we've never faced before, very much a societal norm, but definitely not a biological norm for us. Another concept that I think is really relevant is this idea of where we get our meat from. This protein source is really, really vital. So if our protein sources are predominantly fed corn or soy, then the meat and accordingly the animal that we're going to ultimately eat is not going to be as healthy as if it was eating its normal diet. See, we can't be any healthier than the animals are that we're eating in the long run. So if you want to be healthy, then you need to eat animals that are healthy too. And so if you feed your animals corn and soy, then they end up with very inflammatory problems, just like a human being would. And if we pump them full of hormones, try to make them bigger and get them to slaughter at a bigger rate faster, then these animals are going to be sicker, and accordingly the human being on the downstream effect is also going to be a lot sicker. So this is a really, really large concern. Last thing that I want to talk about that's something that's really new in our modern world is this idea of always having access to pretty much every type of fruit or plant available. Normally, we went through seasons, And plants would have seasonal times where the variety of plant that you would want to eat would only be available for a short period of time. And that made it so that when you were eating that food product, you got the best quality ingredient, which would give you the most nourishment in your body. These days, when you go into the grocery store, especially a big chain grocery store, you can get bananas and strawberries and raspberries and blueberries and all these things year round, which means we're taking those food sources from all over the world. We're sourcing them and we're flying them all the way across the entire world, dropping them into your local grocery store, which, it's great. Trust me, I love berries year round. However, at the same time, we have to think of this from an environmental impact perspective. The amount of oil and fuel that we're burning and the environmental impact that it's having as we take berries and bananas and so forth and we drop them into our local grocery stores, it's much more of a profound impact that we'd really like to avoid. So a few things that we can do to live from a more biological, normal perspective is start sourcing your food locally. So get to know your local farmer. I know that most of the farmers in my area enjoy when families come and introduce themselves and take the concept of where they get their food seriously. So especially if you're going to find a local protein source, know your farmer, right? Your chicken, your beef, and your pork, go and visit the place where these animals are being raised. Find out what's in their diet on a regular basis. Make sure that they're living a good quality life so that they can be healthy and in turn you can be healthy. I think it's also really a good idea to potentially have a CSA box, a community service agreement, a community service agriculture agreement. These are boxes that can be delivered to local community-based facilities, sometimes at offices, sometimes at businesses, and you're getting locally sourced fruits and vegetables. They'll come on a rotating basis. This is a really great way to get really high quality produce. And then lastly, I'd recommend the idea of taking a look at just going to your local farmer's market. Usually on Saturdays and Sundays in your area, there'll be a number of tents that'll pop up and you'll have access to the best of the best stuff. And the best part is, remember, take your kids with you. Teach them what it is to live a healthy lifestyle from a nutritional perspective. Talk to them about this idea of living in accordance with your biological norms and getting away from what society is telling us is normal. One concept that I think is a great idea that was put forward by Michael Pollan, who's an author, is this idea of eating food, mostly plants, and not too much. I think that concept says so much in such a very succinct fashion that if you're ever struggling on what you should be putting in your body to live in your more biological norms, this is a great place to start. So can't wait to talk to you guys next week in response to our next second most common challenge associated with living in association with our biological norms. I hope you guys have a great week. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.